The entire ballroom exploded into applause as my husband slipped a diamond ring onto another woman's finger. He smiled. She laughed. Someone behind them shouted, "Congratulations!" Champagne glasses clinked. Phones were raised to capture the perfect Valentine's Day proposal. Red roses covered every table, golden lights shimmered across the ceiling, and a violin quartet played as though this were the happiest love story in America. No one noticed me standing in the doorway. Not with my military duffel bag still hanging from my shoulder. Not with the bouquet of roses I'd carried all the way home from the airport. Not with the smile that had vanished from my face. I had flown home early from Fort Carson after finishing a training rotation 2 days ahead of schedule. My commanding officer had approved the leave because I'd spent nearly 8 months away from home, and everyone agreed my husband deserved a Valentine's surprise. I certainly thought he did. I'd even planned a 5-day getaway to Hawaii. The reservations had been made months earlier. Oceanfront suite, sunset dinner, whale-watching cruise. It was supposed to be our first real vacation since my deployment. Instead, I watched my husband kiss the company's new CEO while she admired the diamond sparkling on her finger. He wrapped his arm around her waist as the crowd cheered louder. "Our future starts today," someone yelled. The room erupted again. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of strangers. I quietly placed the bouquet into a nearby trash can. Then I turned around and walked away. No dramatic confrontation. No screaming. No tears. Military service teaches you something civilians rarely understand. When everything falls apart, you breathe. You assess. Then you act. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I'd already canceled our Hawaii reservation. As I crossed the parking garage, I logged into our banking app and froze every joint account we shared. My next call went to my attorney. "I want my ownership transferred immediately." He didn't ask questions. He already knew I still owned 42% of the company. Very few people did. Years earlier, I'd quietly invested my re-enlistment bonuses, family inheritance, and retirement savings into helping my husband build the business from a rented warehouse with 6 employees. I never wanted recognition. He loved being the public face. I preferred wearing a uniform. The company eventually grew into one of Colorado's fastest-rising technology firms. Most people believed my husband built it alone. I let them believe it. Now I was done protecting that lie. "Proceed," my attorney said. "I already have the paperwork prepared." I ended the call. For the first time all evening, my hands started shaking. Not because I doubted my decision. Because I finally understood my marriage had ended long before tonight. I simply hadn't been invited to the celebration. 30 minutes later, I pulled into my driveway. My phone lit up. 23 missed calls. Then 51, 94, 138. Finally, 187 missed calls. All from my husband. I silenced the phone without listening to a single voicemail. I had barely stepped inside my house when the doorbell rang. Once, then again. Then again. I looked through the window beside the front door. Standing on my porch, breathing hard as if he'd sprinted the entire way there, was my husband. I stood there without opening the door. The porch light cast a pale glow across my husband's face. His suit jacket was gone. His tie hung loose around his neck. He looked nothing like the confident executive who had been smiling beside another woman less than an hour earlier. He knocked again. "Emily, please." I didn't answer. "Please, just let me explain." His voice cracked, but I wasn't ready to hear it. For almost a full minute, we stood on opposite sides of the same front door, the same door we'd walked through together countless times over 15 years of marriage. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, cursed under his breath, and hurried back to his car. Within seconds, he was gone. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. I set my duffel bag on the kitchen floor and looked around the house. Everything appeared exactly as I'd left it 8 months earlier. Our wedding photo still sat above the fireplace. The framed American flag from my father's military funeral remained beside it. My husband's favorite coffee mug rested in the drying rack. It looked like a home, but somehow it no longer felt like one. I made myself a cup of coffee instead of pouring a glass of wine. The Army had taught me that difficult decisions should never be made with a cloudy mind. As I wrapped both hands around the warm mug, memories came rushing back. I met Daniel when I was 26. He wasn't wealthy. Neither was I. He worked as a software engineer for a struggling startup. I had just earned my commission in the Army. Our first date was at a tiny diner outside Colorado Springs. He apologized because he couldn't afford anything nicer. I laughed and told him pancakes tasted the same no matter where you ordered them. That was the beginning. For years, we lived modestly. While I spent months away on training exercises and deployments, Daniel worked every night chasing his dream of building his own software company. Whenever I received re-enlistment bonuses, hazardous duty pay, or overseas deployment incentives, we invested every dollar. When my grandmother passed away and left me a substantial inheritance, I invested that too. Friends told me I was taking an enormous risk. They weren't wrong, but I believed in my husband. When the company finally launched, we made one important decision together. Daniel would become the public face. I would stay in the background. My military career required privacy, and neither of us wanted investors questioning whether the business depended on military connections or family money. So my ownership stayed mostly invisible, legally documented, financially protected, but almost never discussed. The company grew faster than either of us imagined. 10 employees became 50. 50 became 200. Within a decade, it was worth well over $1 billion. People called Daniel a self-made entrepreneur. Every time I heard those words, he would squeeze my hand beneath the dinner table. "You know the truth," he'd whisper. Back then, that was enough. At least I thought it was. Then about 3 years ago, the board hired a brilliant executive named Victoria Lawson. She had an impressive resume, endless confidence, and a reputation for rescuing struggling companies. Daniel admired her immediately. At first, I admired her too. She was intelligent, driven, fearless. Everything changed slowly. Business dinners became weekend conferences. Weekend conferences became overseas strategy meetings. Phone calls from Daniel grew shorter. Video chats during my deployments became less frequent. Whenever I asked if everything was all right, his answer never changed. "Work's just been crazy." I believed him, because trust had always been easier than suspicion. That night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I finally admitted the truth. The betrayal hadn't started on Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day was simply the first time I had seen it with my own eyes. Victoria Lawson wasn't the kind of woman people ignored. She entered every room as if she already owned it. Confident without hesitation, polished without trying, smart enough to earn respect, charming enough to win loyalty. When Daniel first introduced us at the company's annual holiday dinner, she smiled warmly and shook my hand. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "Daniel says you're the strongest person he knows." I smiled back. "That's kind of him." She looked me straight in the eye. "It takes a special woman to spend so much time serving her country." At the time, I believed every word. Looking back, I wonder if she was studying me more than complimenting me. Over the next 2 years, Victoria became almost inseparable from the company. The board loved her. Clients trusted her. Employees admired her. Within 18 months, she had been promoted to CEO. Daniel often praised her leadership during our phone calls. "She's incredible under pressure. I don't know how we managed before she got here." The company wouldn't be where it is without Victoria. I never felt threatened. Why would I? Daniel was my husband. I trusted him with my life. Besides, military life teaches you that insecurity can destroy relationships faster than distance ever will. I refused to become the jealous wife calling every night to ask where her husband had been. Instead, I focused on my own responsibilities. My deployments grew longer. Training became more demanding. Sometimes we went days without reliable communication. Whenever I finally reached him, he sounded distracted. "I'm heading into a meeting. I'll call you tomorrow." I'm exhausted. Those conversations became shorter. Then they became routine. One evening while I was stationed overseas, my closest friend Rachel called unexpectedly. She had attended one of the company's charity galas. "I don't want you to misunderstand me," she began carefully, "but Daniel and Victoria seem unusually close." I laughed. "They work together every day." "I know." She hesitated. "It just didn't look professional." I appreciated her honesty, but I defended him anyway. "Rachel, investors expect executives to appear united. I've seen photos. It's probably just business." She didn't argue. She simply said, "I hope you're right." So did I. Months passed. Social media filled with photos of company events. Daniel and Victoria stood side by side in nearly every picture. At leadership conferences, award ceremonies, fundraising dinners. Business magazines started calling them Colorado's new corporate power duo. The headlines made me uncomfortable. Daniel brushed them off. "It's free publicity." He always had an explanation, and I always accepted it. The truth is, trusting someone isn't a single decision. It's thousands of small decisions made over years. You choose to believe the explanation instead of the doubt. You choose faith over fear. Again and again, until one day, there are no explanations left. About 6 weeks before Valentine's Day, one of the company's longtime accountants sent me a message. It was brief, professional, almost hesitant. "Mrs. Carter, if you're coming home soon, there are some things I believe you deserve to know." Before I could respond, the message disappeared. A few minutes later, the accountant emailed again. "Please disregard my previous message. I assumed she'd sent it by mistake. Now I knew better." Someone had frightened her into silence. Then came Valentine's Day. The roses. The Hawaii trip. The ballroom. The kiss. The ring. The applause. None of it had been spontaneous. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It had been building for months while I was serving my country thousands of miles away. And as I sat alone in my living room that night staring at my silent phone, I realized something else. The biggest betrayal wasn't that my husband had fallen in love with another woman. It was that dozens of people had watched it happen. And not one of them thought I deserved to know. The doorbell rang again. 3 slow chimes. Not impatient. Desperate. I stood in the hallway staring through the narrow window beside the front door. Daniel was still there, shoulders slumped against the February wind. His expensive suit looked wrinkled now, and the confidence I'd seen in the ballroom had completely disappeared. For a moment I remembered the young man who once saved for weeks just to buy me a birthday necklace that cost less than $50. Then I remembered him kissing Victoria. I unlocked the door, but only enough to keep the security chain in place. "What do you want?" I asked. Relief flooded his face. "Emily, thank God." "Answer the question." He swallowed hard. "You don't understand what happened." "I understand exactly what I saw. It wasn't what it looked like." I almost laughed. "I watched you put a diamond ring on another woman's finger." "It was for the investors," he blurted out. "Victoria and I have been negotiating a merger with a global firm. They wanted stability. They wanted to see strong leadership. The engagement announcement was supposed to increase confidence before the deal closed." I stared at him. "So you publicly announced your engagement to another woman? To help the stock price? It sounds crazy when you say it like that." "No, Daniel, it sounded crazy the moment you did it." He rubbed both hands across his face. "I was going to explain everything afterward. After the proposal. After the party. After the applause." His eyes dropped to the porch floor. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words hung in the cold night air. I had heard soldiers apologize after friendly fire accidents. I'd seen young officers apologize to grieving families after training exercises went wrong. Those apologies carried the weight of genuine regret. Daniel's apology felt different. He wasn't apologizing because he had betrayed me. He was apologizing because I'd found out. He took one cautious step closer. "Please, let's go inside." "No. We've been married for 15 years. And tonight you announced your engagement to someone else." His voice cracked. "I love you." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I asked the one question he couldn't avoid. "When were you planning to tell me?" Silence. Not 5 seconds. Not 10. Nearly half a minute. Finally he whispered, "I don't know." That answer hurt more than the kiss. Because it was honest. He hadn't made a plan. He had simply expected life to keep moving until somehow everything worked itself out. People often imagine betrayal begins with one terrible decision. It rarely does. More often it's 1,000 small compromises. One lie becomes another. One excuse becomes another. Until eventually the truth has no place left to live. Daniel looked up again. "Please don't do anything you'll regret." I almost smiled. "I won't." He reached for the door. "I've already called the bank." "I know." His face drained of color. "My attorney called me before you got here." His breathing became shallow. You already moved your shares." I instructed him to. "You can't do this." "I already have." For the first time that evening, genuine panic replaced desperation. "You'll destroy the company." I shook my head. "No, Daniel." I met his eyes without anger, without tears, without raising my voice. "You destroyed it the moment you decided your wife was less important than your ambition." I gently closed the door. The lock clicked into place. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps retreat down the porch. Then the sound of a car engine fading into the distance. The house became quiet again. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It wasn't Daniel. It was my attorney, I answered. His first sentence told me everything had just changed. "The board has called an emergency meeting," he said. "Emily, they just found out who owns the 42%. I slept for less than 2 hours that night, not because I was heartbroken, because my phone never stopped vibrating. Lawyers, financial advisors, board members, even reporters. By sunrise, the story had already begun spreading through Denver's business community. A major shareholder had withdrawn support. No one outside the company knew that shareholder was me. Not yet. At 7:30 the next morning, my attorney Michael Harper called again. The emergency board meeting starts in 30 minutes. What are they saying? They're asking one question, which is, why didn't anyone know Mrs. Emily Carter owned 42% of the company? I gave a quiet laugh. They knew. Michael paused. They just never bothered to ask who I was. For years, I had attended company events only occasionally because of military deployments. When I did appear, people assumed I was simply Daniel's wife. Few realized my ownership had always been listed through a family investment trust established years before our marriage. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Almost nobody paid attention. Until now. By 9 o'clock, Michael texted me a copy of the company's stock activity. The numbers were ugly. Investors hated uncertainty. Rumors spread faster than facts. Within the first hour of trading, the company's value had already dropped nearly 8%. By lunchtime, business news outlets were reporting that an unnamed principal shareholder had suspended financial support pending serious governance concerns. The board demanded answers. Daniel had none. Victoria had even fewer. Late that afternoon, Michael called from outside the boardroom. You should hear this. He placed me on speaker without announcing I was listening. A director spoke first. Daniel, is it true your wife controls 42% of this company? Yes. And you failed to disclose that your marriage is collapsing. Silence. Another voice interrupted. Did you announce an engagement to the CEO while you were still legally married? Yes. Someone slammed a folder onto the conference table. What were you thinking? Daniel didn't answer. Victoria finally spoke. Our personal lives have nothing to do with company performance. An older board member disagreed immediately. When the CEO and founder announce an engagement during a corporate event, while concealing a marriage to the company's largest individual shareholder, it becomes everyone's business. The room fell silent. Michael muted the call. I've never seen them this angry. They're not angry because of the affair. No. They're angry because trust disappeared. He sighed. Exactly. An hour later, another call came. This time from the company's chief financial officer, a man named Harold Simmons. He'd worked beside Daniel for almost 20 years. Mrs. Carter. His voice sounded exhausted. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. He hesitated. I should have called months ago. My grip tightened around the phone. You knew. I suspected. How long? Since Thanksgiving. Nearly 3 months. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. He sounded ashamed. I convinced myself it was a personal matter. I closed my eyes. It stopped being personal the moment it endangered the company. I know. I'm sorry. After we ended the call, I stood outside on my back patio. Snow drifted quietly across the yard. The world looked peaceful. But somewhere downtown, the company Daniel and I had built together was beginning to crack. Not because I wanted revenge, because lies eventually demand payment. That evening, Daniel appeared on every local business channel. His prepared statement lasted less than 2 minutes. He denied nothing. He admitted nothing. He simply asked investors to remain confident. The market answered before sunrise. The company's stock dropped another 11%. For the first time in its history, people weren't questioning the technology. They were questioning the people running it. And that was a far more dangerous problem. By Wednesday morning, the story had gone national. Business networks debated the company's future. Financial analysts questioned its leadership. Social media was flooded with headlines. CEO's Valentine's engagement sparks corporate crisis. Hidden shareholder threatens billion-dollar tech firm. Most people only saw the scandal. They didn't know the whole story. Neither did the board. Not yet. At 10 o'clock, Michael called. The investigation has officially started. What changed? Someone came forward. Who? The accountant. I immediately thought of the message I'd received weeks earlier. Mrs. Carter, there are some things I believe you deserve to know. The one she'd deleted. Michael lowered his voice. Her name is Linda Brooks. She's meeting with the board right now. What does she know? Apparently, quite a lot. An hour later, he called again. This is worse than we imagined. Linda had brought copies of expense reports, hotel invoices, private flight records, corporate credit card statements. Everything had been approved as executive business travel. But many of the trips had no investor meetings, no conferences, no clients, only Daniel and Victoria. One invoice showed a luxury resort in Napa Valley. Another listed a beachfront villa in Maui. There were spa charges, couples dinners, wine tastings, expenses that had nothing to do with running a technology company. The room had gone silent as Linda explained how she'd questioned the charges months earlier. Daniel told her not to worry. Victoria said the board had already approved everything. Neither statement was true. Then another surprise arrived. The company's human resources director requested permission to speak. She admitted receiving anonymous complaints from employees nearly a year earlier. Several staff members believed Daniel and Victoria were involved romantically. One employee even reported seeing them holding hands after an investor dinner. The complaint was quietly closed. No investigation, no follow-up. The board members stared at one another in disbelief. "This should have been reported," one director said. "It should have," the HR director answered softly. "I failed." By early afternoon, more employees began speaking. Not because they wanted revenge, because they were tired of protecting a lie. One senior engineer admitted people had started referring to Daniel and Victoria as the real couple months ago. An executive assistant revealed she had booked hotel suites with only one bedroom. Another manager confessed he'd been instructed to remove Emily Carter's name from several company biographies before investor presentations. They wanted people to think Daniel was completely independent, he explained. The image was easier to sell. Piece by piece, the truth assembled itself. The affair, the deception, the misuse of company funds, the deliberate effort to erase me from the company's story. None of it had happened overnight. It had taken months, maybe longer. Late that afternoon, Michael called one last time. "The board just voted." "For what?" "They've placed Victoria on immediate administrative leave. And Daniel, his authority has been temporarily suspended pending the investigation." I closed my eyes. I didn't feel victorious, only tired. Very tired. That evening, the front page of every major Colorado business publication carried the same photograph. Daniel and Victoria smiling together beneath Valentine's decorations. The engagement ring sparkled under the lights. The headline beneath it read, "When personal betrayal becomes corporate fraud." For the first time since Valentine's Day, the public finally understood. This was never just about a broken marriage. It was about broken trust. And trust is far more expensive to replace than money. The emergency board meeting lasted nearly 6 hours. By the time it ended, the company we'd built over 15 years had entered a new chapter. One without Daniel. One without Victoria. Michael called just before sunset. "It's official." I already knew what he was going to say. The board voted. They did. And Victoria Lawson has been terminated as CEO. I remained silent. And Daniel, he resigned before they could remove him. That surprised me. Not because he left, because Daniel had always believed he could fix anything. Apparently, even he understood this couldn't be repaired. The board released a brief public statement that evening. It mentioned leadership changes, an internal investigation, a commitment to restoring public trust. It didn't mention the affair. It didn't mention me. It didn't need to. Everyone already knew. Within 24 hours, investors responded. The stock stopped falling, not because confidence had returned, because uncertainty had finally been replaced with action. The next morning, I drove downtown for the first time since Valentine's Day, not to confront anyone, to attend my own meeting. As the company's largest shareholder, I had every legal right to be there. When I entered the boardroom, conversations stopped. Several directors stood to greet me. Others couldn't meet my eyes. Harold Simmons walked over first. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." Then something unexpected happened. Linda Brooks, the accountant who had finally spoken up, approached me. She looked nervous. "I've wanted to apologize." "You already did." "I should have done it sooner." She looked down at her hands. "I kept convincing myself someone else would." I smiled gently. "That's how silence spreads." Tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know. And thank you." She blinked. "For what?" "For finally choosing honesty." A few moments later, the acting chairman invited me to speak. I stood at the end of the long conference table and looked around the room. Some faces were familiar. Others weren't. But every person there was waiting to hear what I planned to do. "I have no interest in destroying this company," I began. Several shoulders visibly relaxed. "Thousands of families depend on these jobs. I won't punish innocent employees for the choices of 2 executives." The room remained perfectly quiet. I will support new leadership. I will support stronger oversight. And I expect complete transparency from this day forward. The chairman nodded. You have our word. After the meeting ended, employees slowly approached me in the hallway. Some simply shook my hand. Others thanked me. One older receptionist stopped me near the elevator. I've worked here since the company had 12 employees. I smiled. I remember. She hesitated before speaking again. I always wondered why your picture wasn't hanging in the lobby beside Daniel's. So did I. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. It had been taken years earlier. Daniel and I stood outside the company's first office, a tiny rented warehouse with peeling paint and a broken sign. We were both laughing. Neither of us had much money, but we had hope. I kept this all these years, she said. I thought someday people should know who helped build this place. I thanked her and carefully slipped the picture into my bag. On my way back to the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text message. Daniel, just one sentence. I'm sorry for becoming someone you no longer recognize. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I locked my phone without replying. Some apologies deserve to be heard. Not all of them deserve an answer. The following Monday, I returned to headquarters. Not as Daniel's wife. Not as the forgotten military spouse. But as the company's largest active shareholder. For the first time in years, my name appeared on the agenda. The conference room felt different. There were no whispers. No awkward smiles. No one looked past me. The acting chairman opened the meeting. Mrs. Carter, before we begin, he stood. So should all of us. One by one, every board member rose from their chairs. I'd like the minutes to reflect our gratitude, he continued. Your decision not to liquidate your shares has likely saved this company. I nodded politely. I didn't do it for the company. Several people looked surprised. I did it for the families. I glanced through the glass wall overlooking the campus. Hundreds of employees were walking between buildings carrying coffee cups and laptops, completely unaware that their livelihoods had nearly disappeared. They didn't betray me, I said quietly. They simply came to work. The room fell silent. That afternoon, I met with department managers instead of attorneys. I wanted answers, not excuses. We spent hours reviewing budgets, stalled projects, and customer contracts. The problems were serious, but they weren't impossible. The business itself had never been broken. Its leadership had. By the end of the week, the board unanimously approved a restructuring plan. An experienced interim CEO was appointed. A new ethics committee was established. Executive expense policies became far stricter. For the first time, major financial decisions required independent oversight. No one objected. Everyone understood why. A few days later, I walked through the engineering department. Employees looked nervous as I passed. Finally, a young software developer stopped me. Mrs. Carter. Yes. I just wanted to thank you. For what? My wife is expecting our first baby. He smiled nervously. When the news broke, I thought I was going to lose my job. His voice softened. You could have shut everything down. But you didn't. I smiled. My father used to tell me something. What was that? Character is revealed when you have the power to hurt someone and choose not to. He nodded slowly. I'll remember that. As I left the building, I noticed a group of veterans working in the company's cybersecurity division. Several had served after leaving the military. One of them recognized my uniform. He saluted. Not because protocol required it, because respect did. I returned the salute. In that moment, I realized something important. Revenge would have lasted a day. Honor would last much longer. That evening, Michael joined me for dinner. You know, he said, setting down his coffee, most people expected you to burn the whole place down. I know. Honestly, I might have expected that too. I laughed for the first time in days. I thought about it. I'm glad you didn't. So am I. He leaned back in his chair. You've already won. I looked out the restaurant window. People hurried along the sidewalk living ordinary lives. I don't think this was ever about winning. What was it about? I thought for a moment before answering. Being able to look in the mirror. Money comes and goes. Companies rise and fall. Even marriages sometimes end. But when integrity disappears, everything else eventually follows. For the first time since Valentine's Day, I drove home without feeling angry. The future was still uncertain. But one thing had become perfectly clear. I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was finally building the one I deserved. Nearly a year passed before I saw Daniel again. By then, life had settled into a rhythm I never imagined possible. The company had stabilized under its new leadership. The stock had recovered. Customers stayed. Employees kept their jobs. Most importantly, trust was slowly returning. It wasn't because people had forgotten the scandal. It was because the company had finally learned from it. As for me, I officially retired from the Army after 23 years of service. The ceremony was simple, just the way I wanted it. When they folded the American flag and placed it in my hands, I thought about every sacrifice my military career had demanded. The long deployments, the missed birthdays, the holidays spent overseas. I had always believed those sacrifices strengthened my marriage. Instead, they revealed whether it had been strong to begin with. A month after my retirement, I launched something I'd been dreaming about for years, the Carter Veterans Foundation. Its mission was simple: help military spouses and retiring service members build successful civilian careers. Some wanted to start businesses. Others needed financial guidance. Many simply needed someone who believed in them. I understood every one of those fears. Within 6 months, the foundation had helped dozens of military families secure scholarships, business grants, and professional training. Watching them succeed brought me more satisfaction than any courtroom victory ever could. One afternoon, while visiting a veterans entrepreneurship workshop, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Harold Simmons. The company just announced this year's community partnership. Oh, they're donating $5 million. To which organization? He smiled through the phone. Yours. For a moment I couldn't speak. The board voted unanimously, he continued. They wanted the company to stand for something better. I thanked him quietly. After we hung up, I looked around the room. A young Marine and his wife were discussing a business plan. An Air Force veteran was learning how to apply for a small business loan. Across the room, an Army sergeant practiced an interview with a volunteer career coach. This felt like purpose. A few weeks later, I attended the company's annual employee appreciation banquet. Not because I missed the business world, because the foundation had been invited to receive the donation publicly. As I walked across the stage, hundreds of employees stood and applauded. The sound echoed through the ballroom. For just a second, it reminded me of another ballroom, another Valentine's Day, another round of applause. But this time, the applause wasn't celebrating betrayal. It was honoring resilience. After the ceremony, I noticed a familiar face standing quietly near the exit. Daniel. He looked older. The confidence that once filled every room had been replaced by humility. He wore no expensive suit. No crowd surrounded him. No cameras followed him. He simply nodded as our eyes met. Neither of us walked toward the other. We didn't need to. Some chapters don't end with dramatic speeches. They end with quiet acceptance. As I left the hotel that evening, I paused outside beneath the Colorado sky. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about everything I'd gained: peace, purpose, and the freedom to begin again. 3 days after the company's banquet, Daniel asked if we could meet one last time. Not to discuss the company, not to discuss the divorce, just to talk. For nearly a week, I ignored his message. Then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, I agreed. We met at the same little diner outside Colorado Springs where we'd had our very first date nearly 25 years earlier. The place hadn't changed much. The coffee was still strong. The booths were still worn. The waitress still called everyone honey. Daniel arrived a few minutes early. When I walked in, he stood out of habit. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled sadly. I ordered your coffee. I looked down. He still remembered. Some memories survive even when love doesn't. We sat in silence until the waitress filled our cups. Finally, Daniel took a deep breath. I'm not here to ask you to come back. I nodded. I know. I don't deserve another chance. No. I just wanted you to hear something from me, not from lawyers, reporters, or board members. He looked older than I remembered, not because of gray hair, because regret has a way of changing a person's face. I spent months convincing myself I could have everything, he said quietly. The company, the attention, the success. And somehow, I thought you'd always be waiting for me. His eyes filled with tears. I stopped appreciating the woman who stood beside me before anyone knew my name. I listened without interrupting. You believed in me when I had nothing, he continued. You invested your savings. You sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays while serving this country. And I repaid your loyalty with betrayal. He looked down at the table. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached across the table not to hold his hand, but to gently slide our old wedding photo toward him. I'd found it while packing boxes after the divorce. We were happy, I said. We were. What happened? Daniel sighed. I started believing I deserved more. He shook his head. I didn't realize I'd already been given everything that mattered. Those words stayed with me. Not because they changed the past, because they explained it. When people stop being grateful, they often begin chasing things that were never worth having. I smiled gently. Daniel, he looked up. I forgive you. His eyes widened. You do? I do. He swallowed hard. Does that mean... I shook my head softly. No. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It simply means I'm no longer carrying the weight of your choices. A tear rolled down his cheek. Thank you. We finished our coffee talking about ordinary things. His parents, my retirement, the foundation, old friends. There was no bitterness left, only acceptance. When we walked outside, the Colorado sky was brilliantly blue. Daniel extended his hand. I shook it. Then we went our separate ways. As I drove home, I realized revenge had never been my greatest victory. Peace was, because money can rebuild a company. Success can rebuild a career, but only integrity can rebuild a life. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people who have stood by you through life's hardest seasons. Never take loyalty for granted because trust is earned over years and can be lost in a single moment. If you've ever experienced betrayal, or if you've found the strength to forgive without forgetting, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if stories like this remind you of the values that truly matter, honesty, courage, family, and self-respect, please consider subscribing so we can continue sharing journeys of resilience and hope together. The end.